I got into private Bitcoin as a way to make anonymous payments online that were, maybe more importantly, evading censorship, not dealing with the absolutely scummy, slimy financial system that we have today, right? All this good stuff, permissionless, person-to-person transactions. So that's why I got into private Bitcoin, a few years ago. And for me, I didn't care about the price. I didn't care about investment. I didn't understand the value of it, that all these people thought it was going to X, dollar amount. And so for me, it was a tool. And then, of course, I learned about Monero, and it was an even better tool. And so, really, I found in the last year, there's been a huge uptick in acceptance of Monero. I think it was Molvad that in the last year and a half allowed you to start paying with Monero. And I remember just checking back one day, and there it was.
Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet, a trustless, open source wallet that gives you the keys to your crypto. Invoice, donate, and trade your Monero with peace of mind, piece of cake. And by StealthEX, an instant exchange where privacy is a top concern. Go to stealthyex.io to instantly exchange between Monero and 450 plus assets without having to create an account or register, and with no limits, making StealthEX a simple way to purchase Monero with crypto anonymously. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you, and supporting us is easier than ever by typing in monerotalk.crypto in your monero.com or Cake Wallet send address field to send us a tip. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews Gabriel Custodiet, host of the Watchman Privacy Podcast. They cover Monero's superiority in terms of privacy and utility, regulatory concerns about privacy tech like Monero and Bitcoin, CoinJoins, the philosophy behind individual freedom, the need for cultural changes rather than just relying upon freedom tools, and the role of adversarial thinking in protecting privacy. Monero Talk starts now.
All right. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Douglas. Happy to be here supporting the Monero community. It's obviously a really good one, very useful tool, and happy to be here.
In full disclosure to the Monero community and all my listeners, I must admit this is our second time recording this show. We attempted yesterday, and to no fault of my guests at all, there were some technical difficulties, and really I just felt like the conversation, fault of my own, I didn't really truly take advantage of the person I'm talking to. I feel like I didn't really get to delve deep enough into your expertise, and I feel like we got hung up on an issue that really was irrelevant to where we should be going. So I greatly appreciate you doing the show again. Shows tremendous amount of dedication on your part.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm sure people will speculate if we keep them in the dark like that, but maybe we'll decide to open up. But no, happy. I think so. We were talking about the kind of the Samaurai wallet stuff, and I think it's okay to just leave that out of there because regardless of our kind of thoughts on them, they're doing their thing and they are who they are, and we can certainly think of many other things to discuss. So.
Yeah. Especially with the overall goal of not further creating more friction between Samaurai and other communities, right? And so
Sure.
we don't want to have the opposite effect in having the conversation. I will say though, I do want to give you a chance to comment on Nopara, because I think you have good knowledge there, and my intent was always to kind of get the other side, me not knowing enough about, Samaurai versus Wasabi, the differences technically, and Nopara's history. So I wanted to give somebody a platform here to kind of retort and bring up what the concerns are. Do you want to, do you mind just covering those concerns? Because I think you did a really good job at breaking down those reasons yesterday.
Sure, I'm happy to do so. And what kind of another thing we were discussing was that TDev, who's a developer for Samaurai Wallet, did not want to come on Monero Talk because you had no para on. And so in Bitcoin privacy, you have to go to extra lengths to take care of your privacy. And a kind of an essential thing is a CoinJoin, which is basically using the Bitcoin blockchain against itself, right? You are putting in you're putting in UTXOs into basically a transaction, and it spits out transactions back to you that very much confuse the people who analyze the blockchain. So the main two implementations are Wasabi Wallet and Samaurai Wallet. You also have a join market, which is kind of a separate thing, not quite as seamless, not built into a wallet. So the issue pertaining to Nopara. So a couple of years ago, the Wasabi wallet tweets out that ZK. So this is the literal tweet. So ZK Snacks, and just to insert here, ZK Snacks is the legal entity, I believe, who is kind of in charge of Wasabi Wallet. So ZK Snacks will start refusing certain UTXOs from registering to CoinJoins. And it was a very vague tweet with a burning candle in the dark. And so people started scratching their heads, like, what does this mean? So basically what it meant was that Wasabi Wallet was now going to partner with a chain analytic company to vet Bitcoin that was going into the CoinJoin. And if they were part of certain lists, they were going to be rejected from using Wasabi Wallet. So this was very confusing for a so-called privacy wallet to be interacting and paying a chain analytics company to do this kind of thing. So immediately, many people stopped using Wasabi Wallet. They stopped. They gave up their sponsorship, all kinds of stuff. So this was one thing that happened with Wasabi. You have other problems, which many see as more fundamental. Wasabi has a different way of doing coin joining, and there have been, and I'll just encourage people to kind of go look into it. I have never done so at very great depth because the fact that they're vetting UTXOs is enough for me never to recommend it. But there are other problems with their coin joining that has not been airtight, let's just say, and that has, well, people can go look into that. The other thing that the Samaurai Wallet team will point out is that Nopara actually doxed the names of Samaurai Wallet in an article in the last few years, which is really slimy behavior. So those are some of the things that we need to recognize with Wasabi Wallet. It's not something that I recommend by any means whatsoever. And yeah, we can kind of just leave it at the facts like that. But that's kind of the situation with Wasabi Wallet.
I appreciate you breaking that down, man, and being the voice of or representing the Samaurai community here. I know there is, you play no official role there, but you obviously follow these technologies very closely, and there was concern that I gave Nopara a platform, which we won't get into the debate on whether or not there should be concern over me putting people on my so-called platform. But I appreciate you getting the other side of the story out. And just anybody who's out there listening should know, I'm sure they already know, all sides are always welcome on the show, especially when it's regarding digital cash tech debate. So if you're in the Samaurai community and you ever want to come on the show, you're more than welcome. But Gabriel, I appreciate you putting that information out there. This leads me, I guess, to now the broader conversation of Bitcoin and Monero. What is your take on these projects? Do you use them both? Do you store your wealth in Bitcoin and then use Monero for transacting? You being a privacy advocate and expert, give us your take there on these projects, on these tools.
I got into private Bitcoin specifically, which is a very specific thing. It means no KYC. It also means making use of a CoinJoin. And the only one really these days to make use of it is Samaurai wallet. And so I got into private Bitcoin as a way to make anonymous payments online that were maybe more importantly, evading censorship, not dealing with the absolutely scummy, slimy financial system that we have today, right? All this good stuff, permissionless, person-to-person transactions. So that's why I got into private Bitcoin, a few years ago. And for me, I didn't care about the price. I didn't care about investment. I didn't understand the value of it, that all these people thought it was going to X, dollar amount. And so for me, it was a tool. And then, of course, I learned about Monero, and it was an even better tool. And so, really, I found in the last year, there's been a huge uptick in acceptance of Monero. I think it was Molvad that in the last year and a half allowed you to start paying with Monero. And I remember just checking back one day, and there it was. It was now accepting Monero. So there's been a lot more acceptance of Monero, which makes it a lot more useful tool these days. And yeah, so for me, I find these useful tools. I would much rather use Monero these days, obviously, to spend. In terms of the saving argument, so Seth for Privacy has guests on who's been on my show, Watchman Privacy Podcast. He's fond of saying, save in Bitcoin, spend in Monero. I think there might be something to that. I don't really overthink this, and I don't really have any hot takes on what is the intrinsic value of crypto. But I think for the Monero listeners who say, well, I would never touch Bitcoin, it's important to realize that it's always good to have a plan B, right? So it's really useful to understand a little bit of private Bitcoin, and you can jump in the Ronin Dojo and the Samaurai wallet and the Sparrow wallet Telegram groups and start to learn it a little bit, because you never know what can happen, and you never know when you might need to use it. And it's best to kind of understand how it works so that you can continue to use these as the tools that they were meant to be, which is private or decently private options to transact without any of the scummy intermediaries who want to stop you from just using a money. So that's kind of how I see it.
What do you see as the difference in terms of utility or value proposition that each of these tools offer, Bitcoin and Monero?
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny Bitcoin's network effect and the sheer amount of belief that people have in Bitcoin, right? That is, it's hard to imagine that ever going to zero. Though I think that the crazy laser-eyed people are going to find that the price of Bitcoin might go down someday, because the more you get regulatory approval, the less useful that tool actually is, right? So Monero has all kinds of utility. It's easier. It settles more quickly. It's much more private. You don't have to worry about all the coin control for the most part and all this other stuff that you would in Bitcoin. But Bitcoin has going for it, as I said, the network effect. And we could argue about some of the development decisions that it made, but I tend not to get too far down that. Again, I want these to be used as tools. So I accept anything that I sell in Bitcoin or Monero, and I just want to be part of these circular economies. And I mostly talk about how to use these things because that's the only thing that I'm really interested in with crypto.
What advice do you give to people? I mean, you're obviously very much extreme in your privacy, extreme privacy. I'm sure you've read this book, right?
Absolutely, of course, Michael Bazell.
I'm sure you've read that book.
Every edition, everything he's put out.
You're very extreme in your personal life, in how you've adopted privacy tech. So what advice do you give people with regards to crypto that want to be private? Do you just tell them Monero, or do you also tell them Bitcoin? And if so, why, and what do you tell them?
So the advice that I would give people is anytime Monero is accepted, for goodness sake, use that, obviously. it is also in your interest to understand Bitcoin for the instances where only Bitcoin is accepted. Maybe you're dealing with somebody who doesn't know Monero, you can't sell them on it, and they're only going to take Bitcoin, so you can do that. Maybe you have this sense that Bitcoin has some kind of intrinsic value, and you just want to hold that. But the important thing, Doug, for privacy is to always go about this with the correct operational security. Running your own node for any of these is huge. Using a VPN is a big deal. I never access the internet outside of a VPN. Tor, anytime you can have something running through Tor, or using a web site with the Tor browser, absolutely a must. This is stuff that, we're living in peacetime for crypto right now. It's very accepted, but these are incompatible with government currencies, to be honest. And so we need to have this adversarial mindset. And to the kind of the Bitcoin privacy people, I'll give them credit that they kind of understand this adversarial mindset because they know that they're dealing with something that can trip them up, that is transparent. So I do find that there's a lot of interesting people in some of the Bitcoin privacy groups who, by the way, tend not to have any problem with Monero whatsoever. They're just kind of interested in the technology of Bitcoin and the coin joining and all this kind of interesting stuff. And they're obviously very in tune with our operational security. So yeah, I mean, these are kind of the fundamentals. I think that, running your own node, using Tor, using VPNs, and just verifying your software, all this kind of good stuff, absolutely essential. Address reuse, it's more of a problem in Bitcoin, but you want to avoid that. When it comes to Bitcoin, you have to worry about things like coin control, etc. But, just always being cognizant of what you're exposing and just minimizing that, if not for the present, then for the future.
This is where I get caught in the Samaurai Monero conversation. You're kind of pulling me in, no fault of yours, but the adversarial mindset. Do you think the Monero community has even more of an adversarial mindset among the average Monero user as opposed to the Bitcoin privacy community, or you see the Bitcoin privacy community as more adversarial?
Yeah, well, I don't need to poke at the Monero folks whatsoever.
I'm just trying to understand that, because this is where I start to be like, I don't really understand why the Bitcoin privacy community has more of that brand when they're actually less adversarial and calculating in their extreme privacy and in their pursuit of creating a technology and using a technology that can't be co-opted or controlled or surveilled in any way. I feel like the Monero people are like to the point of extreme where it almost doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. So if this was just about privacy technology, right, there would, you might say, well, there's always the next one. There's something more to it. And for Bitcoin, you might call it simply the network effect. There are a lot of people in these Bitcoin communities which see, which prefer the economic decisions that Bitcoin makes. I don't know exactly, it kind of varies person to person. What I was simply saying is that I think the Bitcoin people, they kind of wake up and they're hardened, right? They have this sense that, okay, we're dealing with something that could be exposing, so we just have to be careful about it. And whereas if you're kind of in Monero land, I find myself saying sometimes, well, this is private, so maybe I forget my VPN one time, or I don't bother going through Tor or something like this. So that was kind of the only minor point. But it is the case that you can use Bitcoin if you buy Bitcoin in a no KYC manner. You're in pretty good shape. You put that through a CoinJoin, and you have some care about your coin control, and it's very unlikely that is ever going to come back to bite you if you're aware of it. So, is it better to have something that is automatically private? Absolutely. But these people in the Bitcoin privacy community, communities, use Bitcoin quite privately, and it's certainly possible to do that. It is some work, but it's not like Bitcoin's a surveillance coin. It's not surveillance city if you go at it the right way. And so that's why you can kind of have your feet in between both worlds. Have a plan B, be able to kind of swap back and forth depending on what people are looking for. So yeah, I'm comfortably happy to be in both worlds, even if these days, especially with the bloat in the blockchain recently, or rather in the cost to transact on Bitcoin in the last year because of ordinals, whereas a Monero transaction is pennies to do. It's a much better spending tool, and the statistics bear that out. I released an episode with coin cards today, and I think you said that Monero transactions are 28%, Bitcoin was like 39%, Lightning was almost zero. So that's pretty impressive for a coin with a much smaller network effect, market cap, whatever you want to say. So yeah, Monero is a vastly superior spending tool, 100%.
What is some advice you would give to the Monero community, people that are listening into this show, things that we can do to perhaps be more adversarial? What's some advice you would give to the Monero community?
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I think things are pretty good. I just would encourage people to always, look into Monero, right? What makes Monero private? What are the technologies? Just spend a little bit of time looking at that. Don't just assume, hey, this is private and will forever be private. If that was the case, there wouldn't be hard forks that were kind of being considered on the horizon. So just be cognizant of that. Always have your operational security in check. And yeah, I would just say that I think when it comes to any advice I would give for people in either community, I would just say let's make these. Let's use these, let's accept these, let's spread the word, because the network effect is really what makes a money succeed or not succeed. So that's also a big focus.
Any advice? I know it's the $1 million question, but any advice there on how we can grow the usage? I know I'm out here every week on this show and then on the live Monerotopia show telling people let's use it, giving examples of it, pointing people to resources. We're building XMR Bazaar, which tends on being a peer-to-peer Monero-based marketplace. But anything that you can think of like that would be great advice for anybody that's on board with that notion, what we can do together as a community to help make it happen.
Well, you would obviously know a lot better than I would, Doug, and you're doing great work to spread that word. The only thing that I might say is if you're trying to spread the word, try to maybe approach it a little bit of a different way. We do know that people don't really care about privacy, but if you sell it as, hey, you'll get your PayPal account shut down for no reason whatsoever, that's not going to happen with Monero. So if you change the wording and say, hey, you can transact outside of the government's approval, outside of the banking approval, and you show different scenarios to people who are, let's say, skeptical of the banking system or the government, that can be another just little way to get people into it and just say, hey, look, you can put a Monero address on your website and have people pay you. And there's nothing on earth that can stop that. That's another powerful way I've found of trying to convince people to jump on board.
Ultimately, big picture, do you feel that we can win? I mean, that enough of us can opt out and move into this world of privacy tools and using Monero and Bitcoin privacy tools to transact daily and kind of create our own society. Do you think there's enough momentum there, and we're capable of doing this, or is it a pipe dream?
It might be possible. I don't think these are ever going to be mass adopted. I don't think we necessarily want them to in some respects, but they're certainly not going to be mass adopted if they are a competition to the state. Now, you can say, well, maybe if enough people are using the tool, then it kind of tilts the culture in one direction or another. That's certainly a possibility, but I don't know. I don't know, Douglas. I've got on this trying to carve out a little bit more freedom and privacy for myself and for the select few who understand these things and try to spread the word. But maybe at the end of the day, it's just going to be one of those things left for the dark alleys of the internet, and people who like it and want to use it will certainly have an avenue. Bitcoin, Satoshi opened Pandora's box. in the sense that you can have something that has the properties of money and that's easy to transact with. And we're never going to, and of course the blockchain, the ability to have these entities, these entries that are non-replicable, that was an immense technological advance. And so we're always going to have these, but yeah, maybe it will just be a few people using it back and forth, and maybe that's okay too.
Yeah, I hear that notion expressed a lot, like, and I guess probably it is from the Bitcoin privacy communities, this idea of maybe we don't want it to go mainstream. Once again, I guess this is where I would question and maybe disagree or try to understand why wouldn't we want as many people as possible using Monero?
Yeah, I think it's just as many people using Monero as possible. What happens when everybody gets their hands on it, right, is that, well, I mean, first of all, people can't get their hands on it, right, because you can't just go to Coinbase and buy your Monero. So already we see Monero you can only track it down in certain ways. And so right away, I think we can see that it's only for the people who know how to get it peer-to-peer, or who have their, whatever, is it still Kraken that still has it listed? I forget. So it's going to be a word of mouth thing and a person to person thing. And so I don't know that can, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing by any means. That just shows that the powers that be see that it works. The IRS can't crack it, and they're very upset about that. They're very displeased by that. And so they're going to ban it. And when you ban it, there's simply not going to be mass adoption. It's hard to imagine that could be the case, right? Are we really going to find people who know how to use websites like kycnot.me, and they're going to have a transaction with somebody who is, and you'll trade some fiat for Monero or something like this? I just don't see it happening. And yeah, it requires a certain amount of expertise in operational security that is just not out there with the masses.
So you think they're going to ban? You think they'll ban Monero in the U.S.?
They might. I think it's Dubai that I learned from you. Basically said, yeah, you can't use privacy coins in Dubai. Now, how can they stop somebody using Monero peer to peer? They can't, obviously, but they can shut down the on and off ramps, and that certainly does a lot of work for the normies. And yeah, they're just never going to know about it. They're never going to get into it. I don't want to be too pessimistic. Maybe we can convince people, right? Maybe I would love to convince people and, talk to family. And I just did a presentation with a bunch of, I guess, normies the other week, and say, hey, look how awesome this is. And yeah, they can get into it too, but it's going to require a lot of work, and I don't think it will spread.
Do you love coffee and Monero as much as we do? Consider making gratuitous.org your daily cup. Pay with Monero for premium fresh beans, and if you like what you taste, send a digital cash tip directly to the farmers that made it possible. Proceeds help us grow this channel, Gratuitous, and Monero.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously optimistic, right? I wouldn't be here, and I guess you wouldn't be here talking about the things you talk about either, right? If you weren't, I wouldn't have this, this optimistic imagery in my background, right? I think there is a way. I think ultimately, if it comes down to it, Monero won't be banned in the U.S. I don't think there's constitutional grounding there, and obviously, there's a lot of things that are technically unconstitutional that end up coming to pass. But I think it will be I think there'd be enough momentum on the side of pro free speech that they wouldn't be able to ban it. Maybe they could effectively try to ban it, right, by making it difficult for exchanges to interface with it or people to interface with it. But I don't think there'd actually ever be a ban. And if there is, then obviously I'm optimistic in the other route where, okay, well, I guess we just have to use it amongst ourselves. similar to how we've seen with other tools and other bans.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think you're right about it. All of that. Yeah. And I think if it will survive anywhere, it'll be the United States, which, despite all the travesties of American freedoms, it still remains a pretty awesome place in terms of freedom. And the Constitution, while under assault, is still respected by enough, at least, that it's not gonna, we're not going to be a third world totalitarian country too soon.
Yeah, I certainly hope not. Although it's like boiling a frog, right? About Bitcoin privacy tools. I mean, so do you have a similar concern there that those will also potentially be banned, or whatever, effectively banned?
Potentially. So this is where the crazy laser-eyed maxis who have these just bizarre cult-like tendencies, where they think that, right, I make the joke, it's like you go to a Bitcoin website and they're just talking about how 21 million is this magical number that God hard-coded into the center of the universe for centrifugal stability, or some nonsense like this. Meanwhile, these people don't even use Bitcoin to transact. They just think that it has some magical value outside of its ability to transact, and the number is just going to go up. And the thing is, the only value that I really see in something like Bitcoin is the fact that you can send it back and forth, that you can transact. And so at some point, that number is going to come crashing down when people realize that it doesn't have value besides that. And if it ever got to that point where people recognize that was the only value, and so they started using it to transact, well, that's when you could see, let's say, the government kind of treat it like Monero and say, okay, people have stopped believing in Bitcoin as an investment. It's back to being a threat to the fiat system. So we're going to ban it like Monero. But the weird thing about Bitcoin is that it has all these people, it has all this institutional clout, Bitcoin ETFs, etc. I don't know what value they see in Bitcoin, like these people who are buying ETFs where you don't even own any Bitcoin. It's absolutely crazy. It's just a bubble. That a huge part of Bitcoin is just this crazy bubble that we're in, and the actual use case is used by very few. So yeah, maybe I've kind of wandered off the question, but
yeah, I guess I was more focused on right, even recently, right? It's not even theoretical. We saw FinCEN proposed rules for Bitcoin mixing, and actually, we saw that happen, right? And it hasn't passed yet, but that's a very real move that the government is making towards potentially, looking to ban these things. Right now, they weren't proposing to ban it. They're proposing rules where financial institutions would essentially have to file reports with FinCEN if it's believed that a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency mixing tool was used by a customer, right, before it was sent to an exchange, for example. So yeah, I mean, knowing that, right, what's your thinking there? Do you think that they effectively tried to ban Bitcoin privacy tools?
Yeah, so the best Bitcoin privacy tool is non-custody, and if you use it in that way, what shows up on the blockchain is simply random addresses paying one another, and so you can actually go pretty far with that. But yeah, sure, the CoinJoins are a great tool for confusing the blockchain, right, and making it so that you hit a certain point when you're tracking things on the blockchain where, okay, you can kind of make assumptions like this may have come from here, but you cannot say for 100% certain. It has no clear deterministic link. And then you can, of course, keep doing these CoinJoins and causing confusion. Now, I know that Samaurai Wallet has high on their list of things to do, making the coordinator of the CoinJoins a decentralized sort of thing. So So I do think that we are close to having kind of all aspects of that. It's already non-custodial. And so I think that we're close, or Samaurai Wallet is close to kind of solving the problem of this can't really be regulated feasibly. And I know as well that they have in the past, Samaurai Wallet, this is one reason why I give them a tip of the cap, because they have left countries that they've been in the past, when I think it was the UK was threatening to ban self custody wallets, and so they actually moved out of Britain, and maybe they would continue to do that until they can get kind of things completely set up where they're outside of the reach of the regulators. And it's open source, it's free and open source software. So if not them, then the next people. So I have some faith that the CoinJoins will be with us in Bitcoin for as long as needed.
Let me ask you. Yeah, so you bring up the CoinJoins, and once again, obviously, I don't follow this very closely, right? I just use Monero. I looked back at my old interview that I had with Samaurai from 2 years ago, and it was when they were first announcing that there would be Bitcoin to Monero atomic swaps, and it was actually a fantastic conversation. I recommend people go check that out, actually, if they want to hear a good conversation. And Samarai's not Samaurai Dev, I don't know what to call it, the Samaurai wallet guy, what his point of view is with regards to Monero. And it was great. But one of the things he had brought up at that time, and I haven't been following the evolution since, is that CoinJoins are in fact identifiable, right? So you're not erasing all the history. So it's known that a CoinJoin happened. Is that no longer the case? And if so, what changed?
No, that's still the case, right? When you're surveying the blockchain, you can see, oh, this Bitcoin suddenly now went into a transaction with 5 or with 4 other UTXOs, and what got spit out were 5 UTXOs of identical value. And yeah, that's clearly a coin join on the blockchain. Now it's getting to the point where most or many transactions in Bitcoin, most UTXOs have a history of CoinJoin, because it's just, it's like you have your cash and you give it to the person at whatever Kroger, and maybe two stops ago it was in a drug dealer's hands, right? And it has trace cocaine on it or something. Well, it's not your responsibility. That's kind of just how, at the end of the day, almost all cash has trace amounts of cocaine. So there's that argument that good luck starting to discriminate against CoinJoins when most UTXOs have a history of it. Samaurai Wallet has other tools where basically you just send it to a successive amount of single addresses, and so on the blockchain now it just looks like, okay, there was a CoinJoin, but that was 5 steps ago. Is that really as suspicious as, do you really want to start banning UTXO if it was 5 transactions ago? So there's other tools in the in their quiver, so to speak. So I'm not too concerned about it. Obviously, Monero is a lot simpler, a lot easier. But yeah, for people listening in Monero and they're like, yeah, what this stuff sounds weird. It is possible to to have your anonymity in Bitcoin. There's it's not it's not a surveillance coin. And it's actually kind of interesting when you just kind of look at it intellectually, some of the tools that are available to use the blockchain surveillance against itself.
Yeah, I often call it a surveillance coin. And I haven't been convinced otherwise. I mean, well, I respect what Bitcoin privacy tools are doing to try to get around the nature of Bitcoin, but fundamentally it's a transparent ledger.
Right, but if I get some no KYC Bitcoin from somewhere, and I buy a Molvad subscription and buy something else, nobody knows that's me. Nobody in the world knows that is me. So it's possible to have some anonymity, so yeah.
Definitely is possible, but kind of dangerous. And if you mess up or leave some other kind of breadcrumb along the way, the pieces could be put back together, right? I mean, even with Monero, there's heuristics that can be used, even with cash itself, right? So the more flaws that the tool has, the harder it is to not be a victim of those flaws. let's jump to another topic, just kind of big picture again. So, given that we're talking about being adversarial, and the need to be aware of what we're up against here, do you think we should be political, right? Like I ran for Congress here in New York, and a big part of really the main reason I ran was because I saw the writing on the wall with regards to where this stuff was going and potential banning. And I wanted somebody to be on the floor of Congress to make the pro free speech money argument, all the reasons why it aligns with the Constitution and aligns with the ideals that the United States was founded upon. Do you think that we should be doing those types of things, or we should take more of the cypherpunk approach only? I think we should do a hybrid, but do you think we should take the cypherpunk approach only and kind of, just build the tools, make them unstoppable, and don't try to even, interface with our overlords here?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a big proponent of routing around the state and just trying to be off the grid and all these kind of good things. It is the case, though, as you kind of referenced there, Doug, that it would be great if we lived in a society where we didn't have to do that stuff, right? So if we lived in the early years of America, even let's say the first century of America, you had a federal government that didn't really have any power, and you didn't have any restrictions on your gun ownership, and you had very few taxes, and there were no surveying entities for the most part, and it was a nice place to be a free human being. And if you have a society like that, we wouldn't need to be talking on dark corners of the internet about various tools and having Tor and all the rest. I don't ever want to get rid of these tools. I think they're essential, but I do recognize that there's a bigger fight here, and that is having a society where privacy is simply acceptable, like it was, let's say, in the United States in the first 100 years. And that is a fight. Is that a political fight, or I tend to think that politics is downstream from culture. So we need to, I think, just be better humans, learn to trust our neighbors, and have local communities and solve things at the local level. And basically a combination of these things. I'm not giving up the privacy tools. I'll keep using them and teaching people how to use them. But I don't know that using VPNs and Tor is going to solve kind of the underlying problem, which is cultural and sure political. I think politics is an expression of our cultures. We get the governments that we deserve. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and I love that idea, and you talked about it very eloquently yesterday. So let's get into that a little bit more, if you don't mind. I think that's a kind of a great thread to pull upon, and it's a big idea. What do you mean by that? That we got to change the culture, perhaps even more so than the politics, right? That politics is downstream from the culture. Culture is where it's at. How do we change the culture, and what does it need to be changed to?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and there's the argument that it's hard to go back to where we were, but I guess if you just were to rewind, let's talk about America. If you were to rewind America for 200 years, let's say, you have a people who did not have a large government because they were self-sufficient and they were not litigious, right? They solved things in their local community. Let's say they had a religious network where their church or whatever was able to solve problems, which today we might offload to the state, the local state, or the county and the state and the federal government. There are 1 out of 300 people in the U.S. is a lawyer. So it's we have abandoned many things that made early Americans, let's say, not need a large federal government. People were ashamed to be on welfare back then. or would be ashamed by the concept of welfare. They took care of these things themselves, right, through their churches and what have you. Whereas today we just assume, yeah, that's the government's responsibility. Meanwhile, the government is happy to take that responsibility and just get larger and larger and larger. So I guess I think if we look at any government overreach today, we can track that down to we gave up responsibility for something at some point. And as with any kind of entity with monopolistic power on force, if you give them more power, it's simply going to enlarge, and it's going to take more and more power for itself.
So simple solution or obvious solution is opt out, right? Opt out, build our own circular economy, circular society, right? Where we are no longer a part of the quote unquote matrix, where we're spoon fed information and propaganda, and just kind of rebuild there.
I'm a big fan of these things, and you might just kind of think of all your interactions with the state, right? And see, hey, what if I just did this differently? You have trash, right? That is a city service. Well, what would I do with my trash if I didn't have them, right? They're not doing the roads. Well, what if I, patched up the roads myself? My neighbor's causing me a problem. Well, instead of calling the police, why don't I go over there and talk to them? And try to work it out ourselves. Maybe our local area has some solutions that we don't need to rely on certain utilities. So if you just think about it in that way, I do think ultimately those are just the kind of the philosophical solutions to the predicament we're on. But I'm willing to consider all tools, because I don't imagine that we're necessarily going to change things. And so let's not give up our Monero and Tor browser or VPNs just yet.
And I'm kind of asking the same question again, but do you think it's ultimately futile, or there is a chance for us as a society to reinvent our culture and get back to the quote unquote good old days when everybody understood the importance of liberty, when people understood it was a God, quote unquote God given concept? Right? Where we're not asking government to provide it to us, but we know that it's something that every human is born with. Do you think it's possible for us to move the needle in that direction to a large enough degree where we actually change things?
Maybe possible, but unlikely. And it's going to require us to give up many of the without getting too without offending too many people, I think that
No, go please offend. Okay. Go ahead.
Giving up feminism, right? Giving up all kinds of things that are products of the last 100-year cultural things that have, I think, led to the problem. So
deprogramming, right? Deprogramming people.
Deprogramming. Yeah. This idea that we want more and more people to have the vote and younger was not a product of the original American founders. They despised democracy, in fact, and write nothing about democracy in the founding documents. So, yeah, I mean, it would be a serious endeavor. It would require individual responsibility at the end of the day. And yeah, I don't know how to instill that in people, but sure, I'll be somewhat idealistic and say it's possible, but unlikely.
And it seems like what we're up against has ultimate power and control at this point. Yes, we have these tools, these amazing new tools that were invented, cryptocurrency and Tor and all these things. But it does seem like what we're up against is an all-powerful thing that is exponentially gaining power by the day. Because of the way it's built, with this constant feedback loop of everybody tuned into the, basically plugged into the matrix and being programmed and reprogrammed and controlled. What do you think is what do you believe we are up against? Is this just a natural product of evolution that we're just up against technology, or is there something more sinister? Is there some force that's looking to control humanity and is using technology to do it?
That was a polite way of saying, "Are you a conspiracy theorist or not?" But I I entertain
What is your theory? Or, what is your theory, right? Yeah. So
yeah.
what theories do
So
you have?
well, yeah, I don't know that I have anything too profound. I went into this just assuming the absolute worst quote unquote threat model possible. That's why I don't really talk about threat models. I just think you should assume the absolute worst and go for broke, basically. Whether or not you think that we're controlled by a select group of people, or that there's an agenda to purposefully remove testosterone from human males, or whatever, it doesn't matter in a certain sense, because I and my techniques that I talk about on my show and elsewhere, and the things I encourage people to do, are for the most part acceptable to combat all of those things. So yeah, I don't know that I don't know if it's purposefully malicious or if it's an accident. I do know, and I have a good episode called Privacy and Psychopaths, that there's about 1% of the population who maybe makes up 10% of the government, who literally has the inability to see others as anything but means to an end, who literally does not have a conscience, and is morally bankrupt and wants to control people, and that the influence of these people has increased. The more centralization has increased, and we see that psychopaths have altered world history, whether that's Stalin, etc. You have basically a different species of human that, and this is scientific. This is not even conspiracy theory. This is just the basics.
I talk about this all the time.
Psychopathy.
Go ahead.
Psychopathy. Yeah. So this is a group of people, and they do exist, and they do exert control in corporations and the government. And yeah, I mean, I don't need to look so much at the news these days. I just assume, okay, I know that there are psychopaths. I know that they're drawn to power. I know that they encourage others around them who are not psychopaths to kind of think similarly. And yeah, I kind of assume the worst and prepare for the worst. And that's just how I go about it. I would be, I'm very interested in trying to get to the bottom of all this, but I don't know that we ever will. So doesn't mean I won't stop trying, but I don't really have very elevated thoughts about what is who's the real enemy, basically.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, because it is just conjecture, right? But I guess if we could know, we'd certainly want to know, because I think that would motivate a lot more people to be up in arms about it, which is literally what we need. And yeah, I often talk about this, this concept of psychopaths, right? It's been around forever, since humans were human. There was always a psychopath lurking somewhere. But historically, we've always been able to topple them. But the issue now is they have an amazing amount of power at their fingertips with technology, and like you said, with the centralized systems that they control. So it's a question of can we topple them?
Yeah. So you're right that we've had psychopaths throughout human history. Shakespeare talks about is it Iago in his play? Anyway, he calls it a motiveless malignity. And so yeah, psychopaths they're basically a separate species of humans. And yeah, in our current organization, where we have such centralization, we have tools like the internet, which on the one hand are freeing, but can also be means for control. And we know so much more about psychological manipulation, how human minds work, which is on the one hand a blessing, but it also allows people to be controlled, as we saw during the last 3 years. So yeah, there's so many more means to control people. Yeah, the expression psychopathy is actually an interesting thing for people to look into. And again, I would encourage people to check out my episode first, Privacy and Psychopaths, because there is, on the one hand, it is a biological thing, right? They have basically different chemicals in the brain that ensure that they do not see the world, or they do not have the same emotions as humans do. But there is also a cultural component to it. And for example, they claim that there are many more times the amount of psychopaths in the West as in the East, right, as in Asian countries. And the theory behind that, exactly, narcissism and selfishness to a negative degree. I'm pro-selfishness, right? I'm an Ayn Randian, but selfishness to a kind of a toxic degree. And so there is a cultural expression of psychopathy. And yeah, they certainly bloom a lot more in the in our current cultural climate. But yeah, can we wrest control from their hands? I do see a lot of people waking up, and time will tell.
Do you think Ayn Rand would be a Monero user, promoter?
Yeah, the one thing about Ayn Rand was that she was not an anarchist.
An anarchist,
and so she thought, and so the fiat, the inflation was not as big a problem in her day. And so she doesn't talk so much about that. She's so honed in on individuals who are absolutely on, pursuing their purpose. And most of the time that was architectural or entrepreneurial, that I can see her not really caring. It's kind of hard to imagine her not caring about, fiat money, the fiat money scam, but I don't know. There's it's an interesting question, but.
And so I guess we could kind of bring this full circle here, or kind of talk where we probably should have started, which was how did you get into all of this? I mean, you're a privacy guru. Was it that crypto took you down this road, or you were already previously going down that road, and that's how you bumped into Bitcoin, privacy tools, and Monero? What was kind of your arc to getting to this place?
So it's no mistake that the brand started during COVID. And I have my nice little warning on my Amazon listing for my privacy guide about, click here to learn more about COVID. I think it's because I titled one of my chapters COVID 1984. But that's just a theory. So thank you, Amazon, for having the fact checkers on top of that. But so it's no mistake that the brand started during COVID. And for me, it was simply, I recognized the importance of individual freedom. And I finally developed a political spine, right? Or a philosophical spine. And I became, at the time, libertarian, probably even more extreme now. And I thought that privacy was maybe not talked about enough at the time. The people who were talking about privacy were, in some cases, oddly communist, especially on the privacy Reddit, and that rubbed me very much the wrong way. They were afraid of Facebook, but not so much their own governments. And so I started the brand as honestly, as a way to create something, have create something, a business, and give people value, and hopefully get some value in return. So that honestly, that was kind of the main motivation. In the process, I found that there was a whole lot to talk about in the realm of privacy that others were not talking about, whether that was the philosophy of privacy, or I quickly got into the crypto aspect of it, which certain people were not talking about in the privacy sphere, which is silly, at this point in time. So there wasn't like a triggering event, right? A Batman kind of parents die event that made me interested in privacy. It was just a slow accumulation, and I decided one day, I can create stuff that's useful to people. So on the Watchman Privacy podcast, I interview people who develop privacy tools, and we don't just talk about digital stuff. We talk about physical privacy a whole lot, and legal privacy and legal structures, and how to learn privacy from people who have been homeless, and all kinds of interesting things. And now it's just become a kind of a little bit of an obsession. Maybe I go a little bit too far, but I think a lot of people appreciate my style, and that I try to cover all aspects of privacy, not just one aspect of it, and that I lean into the politics and the philosophy. And so it's kind of developed Watchman Privacy has developed a personality of its own, for sure.
And I'm sure it's been a liberating experience, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Not just to have a means to be, in some sense, independent from all of the financial nonsense in the world, but to, of course, I practice what I preach. So, like on my Twitter profile right now, the pinned tweet is showing some of my statistics. I have not connected my name to the place that I've been going to sleep at night for the last 4 years. VPN usage 100%, cash only, all these kind of things, and it has been liberating. Just the sheer minimalism is another aspect that I talk about pertaining to privacy. It's not about it's not about having more things, having more encrypted messengers. It's actually about having fewer. So I have some kind of counterintuitive takes on privacy that I often bring out. But yeah, it's been liberating to kind of escape certain aspects of the system, and also to just practice minimalism and realize that you can actually get by with being almost a neo-Luddite these days. Obviously, I learned the technology, but that doesn't mean I rely on it every day. So yeah, it's been liberating in many respects.
I'm smiling because that's very much my nature as well. We touched on it yesterday. One of the fondest moments in my life was when I broke my cell phone out of college. It was after I graduated, and I just started my my first full-time job, and my cell phone broke. I mean, this is many years ago. This is pre-smartphone, but we're still tethered to our phones at that time, texting and whatnot. And a week went by, I didn't fix it. 2 weeks went by, 2 months, and I ended up going an entire year without it. And it was just great. I was just checking my voicemail to get back. If the call wasn't important enough, they would leave a voicemail. Otherwise, I guess they didn't really need to get to me. And it gave me so much time and ability to focus on things and to focus on my own thoughts. I've always been the type of guy like detethered, haven't had a TV. Well, I have a TV in my house, but kind of like got rid of cable. One of the early people, like, not have cable or anything, right? Just use the internet and get information from that. And it's definitely liberating. It's kind of ironic that we live in these modern times and we have all these tools that can do these things for us, but it ends up being quite exhausting, right? Because it's so overwhelming, and all of them all of these things are fighting for our time and stealing it.
I agree. And this is also something I talk about. I talk about lifestyle stuff. I have a couple good episodes. 2 that come to mind. Jason is a private person and escaping the culture industry. And we just talk about, how do we become ends in ourselves as human beings and not reliant on all this technology, which in most cases is not actually progressive. Like, we don't need all this stuff. It's not actually making us better humans. I take more steps without a fitness tracker than if I had one. I'm more productive without productivity software. It's in many cases it's a trap, and we need to be careful about what is actual good technology and what is just a distraction.
All right, Gabriel, man, thank you so much. This is fantastic, and I greatly appreciate you letting me have you twice. I think this is a much better product here. Once again, no fault of yours on that first go around. That was all me, and so greatly appreciate it. And thank you, man.
My pleasure. Watchman Privacy Podcast, and it's free, and you'll find everything else you want to from there. So yeah, it's been my pleasure, and hope to talk again.
Yeah, cheers. Maybe we could get you to jump on a Monerotopia show one of these days. That would be nice too.
Absolutely. Looking forward to spreading the word with Monero. It's a huge tool, a big proponent. Everything I do, I accept Monero, and I give back in Monero. So, yep.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to our show on YouTube, Odyssey, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to monerotalk.live to subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.